Good afternoon, everyone. We begin our study into Judges chapter 16. This is the final chapter that discusses the last judge of the series by the name of Samson. Just by way of review, I just wanted you to see that back in chapter 15, in verse 20, we are told that Samson judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. When we get to chapter 16, I just want to remind us that this verse 20 in chapter 15 was actually unusually stated at the height of Samson's judge rule as a leader over the Israelites. The chapter 16 that we are getting into right now will become the final chapter of Samson because it marks his downfall. And yes, we are also reminded for the 20 years. But in chapter 15, it is at the height of his prowess, at the height of his leadership. In chapter 16, it is going downhill from here. We begin in chapter 16 to talk about Samson. And then, so after chapter 15, sometime thereafter, Samson went to Gaza. Now, Gaza is the sea coast area, which is in the southeast corner. And it's a Philistine area. And then he saw a harlot there. And this marks the beginning of his downfall, that he's using more of his eyes and he is tempted and he is doing things which he should otherwise not. He saw the harlot and then he went into her. The idea here is he had relations with her. But more importantly, the interest of Samson was to tease the people from Gaza. So, and when the Gazites, the people from Gaza, found out that Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. Now, understand this, in a city, there is always a gate. And the gate is where people go in and out. And so they are there at the gate of the city to wait for Samson to leave the place. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And so they thought that they could actually get hold of Samson. Now, what happened is that in verse 3, and then the story goes, we are now told the last chapter of Samson's life. And then Samson laid, this word lay is lie down in preparation until the middle of the night. So we call it midnight, but literally the middle of night. When the time came, and then he arose at the middle of the night, and then we have a missing word here, and then after he woke up, and then he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gate posts. It probably looked like this. The two gate posts, and then the two doors of the city. And understand that these are all built into the walls of the city, right? Built into the walls of the city. So you can tell that these are not trivial places to be. He pulled them up. This word he pulled, there is a word here, and then. After he got hold of the doors and the gateposts, and then he pulled them up with the bar and everything else. And then we have another phrase here. And then notice all of this are happening one after another. Put them on his shoulders. And then carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. And so he was able to demonstrate some supernatural powers. But one of the things that we don't read anymore is that you don't read how the how God came upon him, how the wind of God came upon him. All that is gone from chapter 16. And the indications is that the powers of Samson is waning, right? It's waning. It's going away. But Samson doesn't know. So verse 4. And then here means sometime later. What does this mean? This part here, he escaped. He escaped from Gaza. While they were trying to kill him or arrest him, he managed to break out of the city. So, and then means, well, sometime later. It happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek. This is Sorek. And her name was, well, in English, it's called Delilah. But in the Hebrew pronunciation is Dalilah, which is very close, right? Dalilah. And the word Dalilah comes from the word Dalal. So let me just bring this out here. It comes from the word Dalal, basically to humble a person or humiliate a person. That is the name of Delilah. And so we are told that her name is Delilah or Delilah because the rest of the narratives is built around this woman who is to humble Samson. Now, verse 5 says this, and then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, I need you to do this. Entice him. Now, verse 5 says, the word entice can also mean to seduce him. It can also mean to persuade him. And it says here, try to do this to find out where his great strength lies, because they are so afraid of his powers, his ability of the strength. And then it says, and then find out by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, remember this number because this number is repeated in chapter 17, right? 1,100 pieces of silver. So the whole intent of Delilah is to bring down Samson, make a lot of money, and literally destroy him by preying on his affection for her. Verse 6. And then Delilah said to Samson. Now, the idea here that we all need to understand is they are now in a relationship. Delilah is not an Israelite. Delilah would be one of the Philistines. And so there is always under the rule of the Philistines, and Samson has always wanted to create problems for the Philistines. And for way too long, for 20 years, they've been tortured by Samson. And given that Samson has this extraordinary strength, they are not able to do anything against him. And hence they kind of left Israel aside. And so she started to seduce him, to entice him, to persuade him. Please tell me where your great strength lies and with what you may be bound to afflict you. What can tie you up? Now, notice the Philistines were not interested to kill Samson. The Philistines were interested to torture Samson. Now, Samson in verse 7 says, and then Samson said to her, well, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings. Now, this idea of bowstrings, these are the strings that is used to shoot bow and arrow. This is what they call bowstrings. These are literally strings that is really strong. So if you talk about a bow and arrow, right? This is a bow. And then there is the string that is used for the bow would be this, and it has to be very strong. Otherwise, it will break if you were to shoot an arrow. And so Samson says, tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and then I shall become weak and then be like any other man. Now, the whole idea here is you bind me, and that's it. I will be weak and be like any other. Now, he says any other man, it is man without superpower, like Samson. That's the whole idea. And so, verse 8, and then the lords of the Philistines brought to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and then she bound him with them. Verse 9, now these Philistines were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And then she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And suddenly, this happened. This word is but this is and then. After he was told that the Philistines were there, he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength were not known. Now, what does this mean? Understand that it is like a strand of yarn that breaks when it touches fire. If you have fire and the fire touches the yarn, so you put a piece of yarn here, and if the fire touches it, it will just snap very easily. It doesn't require any strength. And so Samson was not hurt. Verse 10. And then Delilah said to Samson, look, you have mocked me. Now, this is a play where the woman is trying to badger the man. You have deceived me. You have fooled me. You have toyed with me, and you have told me lies. Now, this word lie is something which is, you can say, deceptive. You can also say not true. So she says, now please tell me, what may you be bound with? Verse 11. And then he said to her, if they bind me securely with new ropes. Now, the idea of new ropes, this would be cords, something which is using some plant of some sort, a bough, some branches which they tie together as ropes. So they can actually be wound up together. And then you find that these are all very strong when they are bounded together, that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So in verse 13, it says, and then Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, oh, the Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And the men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. Now, all of this is to show us that the Philistines have never acted yet, because before they can act, Samson had already broke through everything. Verse 13. He says, and then, now we have a missing and then here. It says, and then Delilah said to Samson, because it was after the second time, he says, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Remember, the mocking here is to deceive, and the lying here is to tell her something that's not true. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom. This literally means that he is going to weave him and hang it to the loom, the roller of the loom. So what if you understand the weaving machinery? The weaving machinery is huge, it's big, but it is very firm. And if his 7 locks of hair is treated like thread and is wound into the loom, that is what it means. Weaving the hair, which means that he's got very long hair. Now, this is important for us to understand. How long would be long? It is so long that you can weave. That's what it means. If you can weave and you weave it, I guess you can say you can weave it like threads. Weave it into a weave or plait as as threads. So the 7 locks of my head is actually treated like threads. And so very long hair. And then she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom, and then said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And then in verse 14, it says that, and then he woke up from his sleep, and then he yanked out the batten and the web from the loom, which means that nothing is holding him down. Even when it is woven into the weaving machinery, the loom, he could actually get himself out even when the hair is woven in like cloth and thread. So verse 15, and then she said to him, How can you say, I love you? Now you can see where the woman's power is over the man. When your heart is not with me, you don't love me. You have mocked me all these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. If you love me, you will tell me everything. Now, notice in verse 16. Verse 16 begins with, and then. We don't know how long this has passed, but eventually it came to pass. And when she pestered him, the idea of pestering here is to cause him distress. Okay, that's what it means. Give him distress. So in modern day, you can say that she was really stressing him out every day with her words, and she pressed him. Now, this idea is press him means she pressed him hard. She urged him. I think you can use the word. She urged him every day so that his soul was vexed to death. Now, this idea of vexed to death means grieved, right? It is to grieve him. It is to make him impatient. It is to work him down to the point where he is to give up. And this is, well, I guess you can call this women badgering. And it is given as an expression, vexed to death, that he is tired of it and he had enough. And verse 17 comes this way. Verse 17 is the conclusion. And then it begins here, and then he told her all his heart, and then said to her, and this is the secret. The secret is no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazri to God from my mother's womb. And this is something that she can believe because he is referring to a ritual and he's talking about God. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. By this, Delilah can tell it is true. This is the end of Samson. He lost out to a woman. In verse 18, this word when is very much and then. What happened was that Delilah saw that he had told her with all his heart. Remember, seeing is to have a good experience, to perceive that he had told him with all his heart. What do you mean all his heart? Whenever you see this, it is something that is very true, that all said was true. That's what it means by all his heart. He had poured it out. He has not held anything back. And it seems that she can tell. So she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, well, come up one more time, for he has told me all his heart. This time it is true. And so the Lord of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money, 1,100 pieces of silver. Verse 19. And then, there's an and then after they all came up, and then she put him to sleep on her knees. Now, in verse 19, this whole idea of lulled literally means to put to sleep. And then, after he has slept, he called for a man. And then, you notice there's a lot of and then, so that you can see it's one after another. Had him shave off his 7 locks of his head. And then she began to torment him. She began to afflict him. And then his strength left him. Now, what was the secret here? It is very much the Nazarite vow. And this Nazarite vow is a vow to God. And for some reason, God gave him supernatural powers as long as he had been faithful to the Nazarite vow. The Nazarite vow doesn't give anyone super strength. It is in this particular instance that God had demanded from Samson his loyalty, and he lost it. Verse 20. And then she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And then he awoke from his sleep and then said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." Look at this. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Now, what this word means is the strength left him, God left him. And this is a piece to say the strength is from God. When he lost his strength, it is like God left him. He has no more power. There is nothing supernatural with him anymore. Verse 21. And then the Philistines took him. And then, now this word, put out his eyes, literally means to dig out his eyes. And then brought him down to Gaza. And then, so we've got one more and then here. And then they bound him with bronze fetters, chains. And then he became a grinder in the prison. So he is put to work. So the judge of Israel is now defeated. Verse 22. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. This is a clue to us. It means in verse 22, this word, however, is and then. You see, a long period of time had passed. So that hair began to grow. Now, hair doesn't grow overnight. We all know that. But it would have been a couple of months, right? About a couple of months. And as he was working as a grinder in the prison, hair grew again. And this is the key to this passage. The hair is indicative of the strength that God will give to Samson. But we must all realize that it is a metaphor. It is not because of his hair, it was because of what God wanted him to do and empowered him. And it is all hinged on his faithfulness and loyalty to God as a Nazarite. In verse 23, the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. Now, Dagon is their god. And the Philistines worship Dagon and calls Dagon Elohim. This is a plural word, but it is for one God. So their God, Dagon, their Elohim. And to rejoice. And it says, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. This is one place that you can see the word Elohim is used for Dagon. This is in the plural. And it is used as the reference to Dagon. And so we can't actually look at a word Elohim and say who the Elohim refers to. So when we read Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it assumes that this is the Elohim that created the world. In Judges 16, verse 23, this is Dagon, their Elohim. So although in the Hebrew sense, they use the same word Elohim as if in a singular, referring to Dagon, one God, but in the plural, it is appearing that the Philistines treat their God as very majestic, very powerful, and so uses a plural word to represent Dagon. And so they rejoice by saying this: Samson is now our enemy, and they just ascribe the success to Dagon. So I just want to highlight to us that the singular and plural word for El and Elohim cannot be assumed its meaning unless we see how it's used in its context. Verse 24. And then the people saw Samson, they praised their Elohim, right? For they said, our Elohim has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. So understand that Samson killed many Philistines, and he is so powerful that they are all so afraid of him. And now when Samson is caught, they ascribe the powers that they had to overpower Samson to Dagon, our God. We come to the last part of this chapter. As Samson's hair started to grow, do not assume that his strength comes back. It is just growing. But the narrative wants us to see the correlation of the Nazirite vow to the strength that God has given him. It is not in the hair, it is in the faithfulness to God. And so it happened when their hearts were feeling good. This one, Mary, means good. That they said, why don't we call for Samson that he may perform for us? And so they called for Samson from the prison, and then he performed for them. Now, this word perform is to act things out. And I guess we need to understand the idea of calling Samson from the prison, and they want to have this word perform literally means to make them laugh. Make them laugh. Be a court jester, basically. Make them laugh to their faces. And so they stationed him between the pillars. Verse 26. And then Samson said to the boy who held him by the hand, because he is now blind, remember? The eyes have been gorged out. He says, let me feel the pillars which support the temple. So they're all in the temple so that I can lean on them. So no need to stand by himself. And so the idea of feel is to grope, to reach out by the hand and to touch the pillar and see which pillar is it, is that he's touching. And in verse 27, he says the temple is full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof while Samson performed. So this is an incredible crowd watching Samson make them laugh. Now, understand this. This idea of making them laugh means that Samson must humiliate himself. This is tough for Samson, right? It's tough for Samson. How to pretend to be stupid, basically, for the sake of making the Philistines happy. Now, I want us to pay attention to the last portion here. And the last portion here starts with verse 28. He says, and then Samson called to the Lord, and this is what he said. So remember, this is and then. After he has held on to two pillars, then we need to understand the picture. The picture here is these were the two pillars that held up the roof of the temple. And most temples there have two big pillars, just like the temple in Jerusalem, there is two huge pillars in front. And they are using this to keep themselves merry. This, oh Lord God. Now, this prayer here is Adonai Jehovah. He says, remember me. You have left me, but please bring me to mind. I pray. And this word I pray is not literally the word I pray. This word means I plead. He is pleading with God. So it's not really literally praying. He says, give me strength. I plead, not pray, right? I plead. Just this once. Just this once. Oh Elohim. So notice the word Elohim is used, but in this case, it is speaking to Adonai Jehovah. And he gives the expression that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines from, well, this word here in verse 28 is not exactly for my two eyes. He says, I will exact vengeance for one of my two eyes. And this is missing in the translation. It is not take vengeance for the two eyes, it's to take vengeance for one of my two eyes. Now, what does that mean? It means this: whatever he is about to do is only satisfying half the vengeance because he lost both his eyes. This is only equivalent to half of what he would want to do. So in verse 29, and then Samson took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple. The idea of supported the temple is to hold it up and make strong. Make strong the temple. And he braced himself, he supported himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left side. We are now described and told what he did. Verse 30. And then Samson said, and this is actually speaking to God, let me die with the Philistines. Now, you need to understand that if God were to give him strength, God can also give him protection, that he won't need to die. But in the normal reading of the text, it literally tells us that Samson has repented. He realized that he had done wrong. And there is nothing much left for him to do but one last piece of good work. And that is to destroy the temple with the people in it. And so it says, and then he pushed with all his strength. Now, this idea of push with all his strength literally means to extend, to stretch out, with his strength. However, remember, God left him and he had no more strength. And so he pleaded with God, just one more. Doing this will avenge one of my eyes. And he said to God, and the temple fell on the Lord and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. And it has given people a different perspective of Samson. And he's not going to die as a whim, but he's going out with a bang. And so in this case, there were more. And these were 3,000 of the men and women all died. So finally, we read in verse 31, somehow they allowed his brothers and all his father's household to come down and take Samson and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. And then this is repeated. He had judged Israel 20 years. And by saying this, the end. That's the purpose of stating it. But when we saw that at the end of chapter 15, it is to alert us that at that very point in time, it's still in the middle of the Philistine control. And now, in these short number of verses, we don't know how long has passed. He came and he asked for strength and he avenged his eye, one of the two eyes. That he has killed more people by his death than by his living. And this essentially is to tell us that God did not stop Samson from doing what he wanted to do. God enabled Samson to do what he wanted to do. And as he stretched out his hand, God gave him back the strength. Now, there is no more strength for Samson for whatever the reason. True, the hair is growing back. So he is as if he's going back onto the Nazarite vow. But there is no more Nazarite vow for Samson. His hair grew, his strength came back just for that one moment, and it all ended, including himself. And so chapter 16 gives us a glimpse of the final judge in Israel who never led them to war to fight against the Philistines. He went out to fight single handedly. And as he fought single handedly, he also died single handedly. And when we get into the book of Samuel, it will be the continuation of this chapter. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.